No, thank you.
The Blackening?
Whoa!
Pick a card. Refuse to play, and you die.
I think we have to play the game.
This Independence Day weekend, we're celebrating a horror movie where survival isn't just about escaping the killer, it's about escaping the stereotypes.
Welcome to 75 Vintage On Demand.
So, what happens when Black horror characters know the rules? We already know how these movies start. Lonely cabin, dark forest, a mysterious masked killer. You've seen this movie before many times. The black guy always dies first, or the black girl. At least that's what horror movies have taught us for decades. But what happens when everyone is black in the movie? The Blackening doesn't just ask that question, it builds an entire movie around it. And somehow it turns one of horror's oldest cliches into one of the funniest horror comedies in years. But underneath the jokes is something much more interesting, a conversation about race, about stereotypes, and about who gets to survive. Today, we're talking about The Blackening by Tim Story, who you may know from his other movies, Think Like a Man, Barbershop, and what is that other one that he's famous for? Ride Along. If you've ever watched classic horror movies, you probably know the formula. A group of friends get together, an isolated cabin, right? Bad decisions all around. One masked killer, then the bodies begin to pile up, where The Blackening embraces every one of those cliches, only to immediately make fun of them, which makes me love this movie even more. The film follows a group of longtime friends gathering for a Juneteenth weekend reunion. They're successful, they're flawed, some are petty, they're competitive, and like real friends, they spend a good amount of the movie roasting each other about as much as they do supporting each other.
What we do on Juneteenth?
No, thank you.
Probably runs on racism.
And when they arrive at the cabin, they discover a strange board game called
The Blackening.
It doesn't take long before the game stops feeling like a joke. A mass killer appears. 2. Spoiler alert. And suddenly the friends are forced into a deadly game where every challenge is connected to Black culture, identity, stereotypes, and history. The rules are simple. Answer the questions in the game, make the right choices. If you make the wrong choices, someone dies.
In your predicament, the black character is always the first to die. I will spare your lives if you sacrifice the person you deem the blackest.
It's part escape room, part horror movie, part social experiment, right? And that's where the film becomes much smarter than its premise suggests. So, what impressed me the most wasn't the mystery, it wasn't even the comedy. It was how believable the group felt. Instead of creating 7 interchangeable horror victims, the film created 7 personalities that feel like people you may know or you've probably met before or that's probably in your family. The successful friend who thinks they're always in charge, we got one of those everywhere in every group. The sarcastic one who masks fear with jokes. The overly logical one, skeptic, every group has to have a skeptic, and the peacemaker. Then there's the competitive friend, and the one who somehow always has a side comment ready for everyone else. Rather than spending 20 minutes introducing everyone individually, the movie lets their personalities emerge naturally through conversation. And I think that's what I really love about this movie. They're like us. They interrupt each other, they argue, they tease one another, they hold grudges, just like we do in our friend groups. Yes, we get over them, but we do kind of hold them. They finish each other's sentences, right? And it feels less like actors reading dialogue and more like longtime friends who've known each other for years. That chemistry becomes the movie's greatest strength. Because when danger arrives, you actually care whether this group survives. At least I did. I cared whether they survived. It was a hilarious watch, and I love the mystery that was like sprinkled throughout. For years, Black characters in horror films often existed as supporting characters. They frequently disappeared early and rarely became the hero. We're starting to see that change in these recent times, and almost never survived to the end. But again, it's starting to change, right? So instead of pretending those stereotypes never existed, it turns them into the punchline. Every horror cliche becomes fair game. Splitting up, investigating strange noises, right? Running upstairs instead of outside, trusting suspicious strangers. The movie constantly asks over and over, why do people keep making these terrible decisions? Let's talk about the fight response, because this might be my favorite part of the entire movie, how they react, right, to the killers. One thing I appreciated is how quickly this group shifts from panic to resistance. They're certainly scared, no doubt about it, but they don't spend much time accepting their fate. They argue, they plan, they're still doing the back and forth banter between each other. They improvise, and when necessary, they fight back. Of course, if they could escape, they would escape, but they were stuck. So as a Black viewer, I found that surprisingly authentic. Not because every Black American reacts the same way. Obviously not. We're not a monolith. Of course we don't. But many of us grow up understanding something very early on, and that is that danger usually doesn't negotiate. And we see this every day in our lives. Sometimes survival requires immediate action, whether that's running, thinking quickly, or fighting back. We have to make these decisions in a split second, being Black in America. So the film captures that instinct remarkably well, I feel. Instead of freezing while waiting to become victims, this group keeps looking for opportunities to escape, to outsmart the killer, to protect one another. They're always thinking, trying to stay one step ahead of the game. Even when their plans fail, they're still trying. They never quit trying the entire movie. And that feels refreshing. They're doing different things. They're active participants in their own survival, not passive victims waiting for the next scene. And I love that about this movie. They're sticking and moving, sticking and moving. This is also comedy with something to say. This is where the Blackening earns more credit than some people give it credit for. Yes, it's funny. It's very funny. At least I think it's funny. I've seen it a few times. Beneath every joke is commentary. The film pokes fun at respectability politics. It touches on colorism, Black stereotypes, of course, friendship dynamics, and the impossible expectation that there's somehow one correct way to be Black. Again, we're not a monolith. We're human beings, and there is not one way to do us. Throughout the movie, characters constantly accuse one another of not being Black enough. Someone likes rock music. Someone doesn't know the trivia. Someone grew up differently than everyone else. The jokes land because they're rooted in conversations that already exist within many Black communities. These are things we talk about all the time. The movie isn't laughing at Black culture. It's laughing with it, which really makes me enjoy it. It recognizes that identity is far more complicated than stereotypes. And at the same time, the film also reminds us that outsiders often reduce Black identity into simplistic boxes, which is unfair. That's exactly what the killer tries to do: reduce people into categories, force them to prove their authenticity, treat identity like a test with only one correct answer. The irony is obvious. Real people don't work that way. Here's where opinions become divided. If you're expecting genuine terror, constant suspense, this is not that. Or nightmare inducing scares, not at all. This is nothing like that. You may leave disappointed. The horror is really just the framework. Okay? The comedy is the destination. The scares exist. Yes, there are a few jump scares in it, but they're secondary, okay? Not meant to really frighten you. The laughs are the main event. You have to think of the Blackening like Scooby Doo almost, right? So, personally, I think that's exactly what the filmmakers intended. This isn't trying to be hereditary, it's not trying to be Get Out, okay? It's much closer to a satirical horror comedy that uses horror conventions to examine culture, which is such a beautiful part of this art. In that respect, this movie succeeds. The humor stays surprisingly sharp without becoming mean spirited, and the mystery remains entertaining. The pacing rarely slows down because I was hooked from the very beginning. Plus, it was very relatable to me in my culture, the culture I grew up in. Final thoughts. The Blackening understands something many horror parodies don't. Making fun of horror only works if you also understand why people love horror. The movie respects the genre while refusing to repeat its oldest cliches without questioning them. It's self aware, energetic, and genuinely funny. And underneath the comedy, it's asking worthwhile questions that need to be exploring. I may do another longer length video about it. It asks who gets represented, who gets stereotyped, who gets believed, who gets to survive, and most importantly, who gets to define what being Black actually means. No single movie can answer any of those questions. But The Blackening proves they can be explored with humor instead of lectures, which I think maybe that's what draws me to it over and over again. For me, that's what makes this film memorable. Not because it's the scariest movie ever, obviously, because it flips decades of horror expectations upside down and has an incredible amount of fun doing it. I would love to hear your thoughts about this movie. Did the comedy work for you? Did the social commentary land the way you thought it should have landed for such a movie as this? And here's the question I want to leave with you. If you were trapped in that cabin, would your first instinct be to hide, run, or fight back? Drop your answers in the comments. And if you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me next time here on 75 VOD, where we explore the movies that entertain us and the ideas hidden beneath the surface. Because remember, some movies entertain us, other movies stay with us.